world fades into stillness as you begin to drift. The wind drifted along the riverbanks, whispering stories so old that even the wind itself had probably forgotten where it first heard them. Beneath a sky so vast even Google Maps would give up, a young girl stood quietly, hands folded in a pose that suggested deep serenity, or more realistically, that she simply didn't know what she was supposed to do next, and thus begins a story that appears peaceful, but upon closer inspection is peaceful to a slightly suspicious degree. This is not a tale of bloodshed, betrayal, or shocking plot twists designed to make the reader gasp, "Wait, what just happened?" No, absolutely not. This is a gentle, meandering journey, slow and unhurried, like a very long meeting with no clear agenda. History here does not shout. It does not run. It does not cause drama. It whispers. It hums softly. It pats you on the head like an ancient lullaby, the kind that leaves you unsure what it was about, only certain that it was soothing. Imagine history not as towering statues or glorious conquests, but as background music on an endless loop, steady, repetitive, with no dramatic chorus or beat drop. A place where the sound of the river blends seamlessly into daily life, and where people move so slowly that if clocks existed, they would likely quit out of sheer lack of purpose. More than 4,000 years ago, in the land between two rivers, later branded by textbooks as the cradle of civilization, some families made a decision that sounded responsible at first glance, but becomes slightly odd the longer you think about it. They brought their daughters to live in carefully structured communities. Not exactly home, but not a vacation either. Perhaps a guided residential experience would sound more modern, but in essence it meant living there, learning there, working there, and gradually adapting to a rhythm of life as thin and even as watery porridge. There were no noisy marketplaces, no vibrant festivals, and certainly no lantern-lit dances perfect for posting on Instagram. Instagram, regrettably, had not yet been invented. Instead, there were stone corridors, shared duties, and routines that repeated themselves with the dependable enthusiasm of time itself. Everything moved along so steadily that if someone asked, "So, what's new today?" the most accurate answer would be, "Nothing, and tomorrow looks promisingly the same." Daily life unfolded with remarkable gentleness. Grain was measured out in slow, deliberate scoops. No one rushed, because there was absolutely nowhere to rush to. Oil was poured into shallow bowls with such care, you'd think spilling a drop might destabilize the universe. Children were taught how to weave, and more importantly, how to listen to spoken history without interrupting. Night fell early. Days were measured not by clocks, but by the color of the sky. Time passed like the nearby river, always moving, rarely noticed. The girl was given a new name. Consultation was unnecessary. Personal branding had not yet entered the chat. Her clothing was simple linen, dyed with crushed plants and river clay. Very organic, very natural, and entirely the result of limited options. She bathed in shallow basins, water carried carefully from the Euphrates in clay jars, each trip requiring patience that bordered on philosophical discipline. The air was thick with the scent of barley and crushed dates. Woven fabric scraped softly as it was shaped. Voices rose and fell in quiet conversation. It was a world without urgency, where even footsteps softened when they touched the dust-packed floors, as if the ground itself had feelings that might be hurt. Modern historians call such places enclosures, or quiet centers of cultural preservation, which sounds impressively academic. Debate continues, of course, because history loves nothing more than unresolved arguments. Were these girls trained to keep agricultural records? Were they assistants in rituals that marked seasons and harvests for centuries on end? Or were they simply sheltered from hardship, spared early marriage and relentless field labor? All that remains are fragments, etched symbols on clay tablets, worn smooth by time, dried seeds resting patiently in stone jars. Hints of a life lived with structure, purpose, and an almost excessive amount of silence. As the girl grew older, her responsibilities evolved. At first, she gathered reeds along the riverbank and sorted them by color, a task so repetitive that anyone lacking patience would inevitably develop it. Later, she learned to spin thread, fibers brushing across her palms like light rain. Eventually, she was trusted with reed styluses, used to carve marks into fresh clay. These symbols told no tales of romance or heroism. They spoke of grain inventories, repaired tools, lunar observations, and seasonal changes. Practical, unglamorous, undeniably useful. She could not read the sky like a scholar, but she felt its patterns in her body, in habits shaped by repetition and time. Now imagine the stillness of night. She lies on a woven mat stuffed with reeds, the soft rustling beneath her like distant rain on a thatched roof. Crickets sing outside, the river murmurs, the world continues on, slowly, steadily, with no need for anyone to panic. She does not dream of escape, she does not dream of glory. Her dreams are made of familiar things, fields waving in the wind, clay jars tapping gently together, the ladder leading to the roof where linens flutter like wings. Her life is not preserved in monuments or epics. It rests instead in the sediment of time, quietly, patiently, waiting for someone someday to look up at the endless Mesopotamian sky and wonder, I guess people lived like this once. Chapter 1. The Quiet Chronicle of the Reed Girl. The air shimmered like silk above the dusty plains, and the river curved across the land like a ribbon of pale glass. It flowed generously, softly, its course shaped not by hurry but by time itself. Along its edge, reeds grew tall and whisper thin, bending lightly toward the water, as if bowing in gratitude. It was early morning. Soft light rested on clay walls that stood silent, ancient and worn smooth by years of sun and wind. At the entrance of a large communal dwelling, a girl of perhaps 10 years stood barefoot, watching her family walk away. Her mother paused briefly, looking back with eyes full of quiet prayer rather than tears. They had brought her here with hope, a hope that her life might be steadier within these walls than beyond them, a hope that she might eat, learn, and sleep in peace, away from scarcity and the fear of loss. The girl's breath made small clouds in the cool morning air. She carried no bundle, no toys, only the memory of her mother's hand brushing her cheek. But inside, she stepped forward into dim corridors where the walls smelled of baked earth and grain dust. An older woman wrapped in simple linen placed a woven reed mat in her hands and pointed toward the sleeping quarters. The girl walked softly, like a leaf, drifting on water. She entered a room lined with other mats, neatly arranged in rows. Some girls were already stretching, rubbing their eyes like waking doves. Others slept still, their rib cages rising and falling in slow waves. The girl laid her mat beside theirs. She lay down. The reeds rustled beneath her like the faintest song of grass in a breeze. She slept. From that day onward, her world became steady, full of calm rhythms. Each morning she woke, when the first light crept across the clay floor. She stretched her limbs, splashed cool river water on her face, and brushed her hair with a carved wooden comb. She learned to fold her woven cloth and place it neatly beside her mat. No haste, no chatter. Each movement was like a slow breath. There were tasks to learn, nothing harsh, nothing cruel. She was taught how to balance earthen jars stacked with dried figs, how to walk with a jug of river water on her hip without spilling a drop, how to peel strips of reed cleanly to weave into sleeping mats like the one beneath her now. Every task was done with slowness and care. The older women demonstrated everything twice, often 3 times, until the motion of it sank into muscle and bone. There were no raised voices, only soft instruction, calm correction, the warmth of a hand on her shoulder, reminding her she wasn't alone. Outside, the sunlight changed with the seasons. In winter, it was pale gold, stretching long shadows across the courtyard. In summer, it glowed fiercely, warming the clay bricks until they radiated heat like hearthstones. The girl did not count years. She counted tasks, counted mornings, counted evenings by the steady curve of the moon in the sky. She was given a new name appropriate for her role in the community, not one she chose, but one she accepted. The name was simple, though she sensed it had meaning once, long ago, like everything here. Mostly she was silent, listening more than she spoke. Someone else's voice, the constant hum of wind through reeds, the tap of pottery in the storeroom, all those things became her companions. Every night she returned to her reed mat, spreading herself onto it like a beam of dusk light falling across ancient stone. She would hear a soft sound, perhaps an owl, perhaps an elder's distant hum, and she would breathe, long and quiet. Sleep would come before she could count even a handful of thoughts. And all around her, under the wide night sky of ancient Mesopotamia, time settled like dust. As the girl grew, her fingers became nimble and sure. She learned the weight of a clay tablet in her hands, how it felt cool at first touch, then warmed gently to her skin. The elder women showed her how to make marks with a reed stylus, softly pressing into wet clay, careful not to break the surface. She did not yet understand all the symbols, but she began to feel their rhythm. A wedge meant grain, a circle meant jar. 3 lines in a row might mean river, whereas a curved shape could be goat. She did not know words. She knew movement. Some mornings she was tasked with stirring jars filled with dried dates, checking that they had not spoiled in the night. Other afternoons she swept the courtyard, her palm dragging through dust, following the familiar soft swirl of sand. All this she did quietly, with a tender reverence, as if the dust itself could hear her breathing. The people outside called the place a house, or sometimes said the girls lived in enclosures. Some whispered it was meant for important work, keeping records, preserving goods. Others believed it was a refuge, a living archive where young women learned discipline, routine, and self-restraint. The truth was softer, lived each day. Tasks were shared, food measured equally, kindness preserved like dried figs in the shade. She did not crave adventure. Her world was still and deep, like the bed of the slow river nearby. Sometimes she walked beside it at dawn, her footprints fading as quickly as they formed. She dipped her fingers into the water and watched tiny ripples drift outward. A faint smile would bloom on her lips, and the day would unfold like folded linen. She made no grand decisions. None were asked of her. Instead, her life wove itself around the smallest of actions. The rhythm of pounding grain into flour, the feel of warm dough in her hands, the scent of smoke curling from a clay oven filled with fresh bread. Each gesture was a note in a song without beginning or end. When she was old enough, she taught others. Small girls with wide eyes watched her hands press evenly into clay or spread oil across a pot's surface to cure it. She did not speak much. Her movements were quiet instruction, her pauses a promise that there was no hurry. She did not watch the sun set dramatically. She simply noticed the way shadows lengthened across bundled reeds. She listened to the soft chorus of crickets in the reeds by the water. She slept lightly when the moon was full, as if listening for something ancient and gentle. Sometimes on warm nights, she would rise and go to the courtyard. She sat on a cool stone bench, looking up at the sky. The stars were bright and endless. She did not name constellations or make wishes. She watched in stillness. It was enough. Years passed, blending into one another. She cared for the storerooms, counted jars of goat milk, oversaw tablet drying. Her hair now long, she bound gently with woven cord. Her hands, though marked by clay and fiber, remained graceful, each finger moving like a reed in the breeze. There was no one moment when she became grown. It was as quiet as a change in seasons. One day she realized that the younger girls looked to her in unspoken questions. They waited for her nod before beginning morning chores. She felt no weight in this. She was like clay reshaped by springs of time. Soft, formable, strong. In this quiet life, she was neither praised nor punished. She simply was. And every night, beneath skies filled with ancient light, whatever dreams she had drifted away, leaving her soft and calm, as if she herself had become the reed she once wove, bending gently in the calm breath of the world. As time gathered itself around her like a soft cloak, the girl, now a woman, continued her quiet work amid tablets and grain jars. She no longer needed someone to guide her. Her movements were the guide. She knew without asking where each clay vessel belonged, how each mark should be pressed. When a jar cracked from heat, she knew how to mend it with river sand and softened clay. When an animal was brought to the enclosure for trade, she could smell its health before elders took stock. Her patience was her teacher. Though the shape of her days changed little, the seasons carved faint lines of time across her face. Her hair, once smooth as silky river grass, was streaked with silver. The younger girls still watched her, and not with awe, for awe had no place hereof, but with trust. When their hands shook pressing clay, she steadied them. If a girl cried in the night, homesick or frightened by dreams, the woman would sit beside her, hands folded in her lap, offering nothing but presence. Sometimes presence was enough. No one asked her if she longed for a different life. There was no different life in their world. All lives flowed like the river, sometimes shallow, sometimes full, always moving forward. There were no weddings here. No children lived within these walls. And yet her care, her instruction, her steady gaze felt like a kind of motherhood, one that required no ceremony, no blood relation. On rare feast days, the women prepared extra loaves of bread. They crushed dried figs into paste, mixing them with honey and offering small portions to every girl. The woman sat in the shade, quiet as always, and listened to others sing. Their voices rose gently, weaving into the air like threads of sound. A new girl brought her a handmade wreath, woven of reeds. It scratched lightly against her forehead, but she smiled gently. There were moments when memory stirred. A scent of smoke might remind her of her mother's robes back in her earliest years. A song hummed by a girl at dusk might echo a tune once whispered in her own childhood. But these memories faded easily, like dust, moving beneath running water. She did not dwell on them. They were stones worn smooth by her acceptance. Time stretched on, each day steady as the last. Slowly, the woman's hands lost their firmness. Her grip on the stylus faltered. She could not see fine grains from far away. She began to sit more often than she stood. Her tasks became fewer. She was no longer asked to lift jars or organize bundles. Her voice took on a softness like smooth sandstone. Her fingers curled slightly as if folded in prayer. The river remained. It sang at dusk, its waters brushing gently across worn stones. The sun still cast slanted shadows in late afternoon, stripes across clay tiles. Wind moved through reed fences, bending them easily, whispering. One night, the woman lay down on her mat. It was the same mat she'd replaced herself at least 3 times over the decades. She watched the moon beyond the doorway, a pale coin hanging almost motionless in the sky. She thought of the river. She thought, perhaps, of the first night she laid her head on reed fibers. She considered her breath a long, gentle thread. It stretched through her entire life and now rested quietly in her chest. She slept. And as she slept, her breath grew slower. No one noticed until dawn's first light crept across her still body. A younger girl reached to wake her and found instead that she'd gone beyond waking. There was no morning song, no public lament, just the quiet folding of her mat, the cleaning of her corner. Her sandals were taken away, her reed comb placed in a wooden box. Even in passing, she asked for nothing. Afterward, life continued. Tablets were carved, water was fetched, sparks rose from fire pits at twilight, and the river continued its endless journey under the silent moon. Centuries later, clay fragments bearing her marks were found by archaeologists. They traced lines pressed under her once steady hand. They studied the grids and grooves, wondering who she was. They called her the tablet maker, the storehouse keeper, the woman of the river enclosure. She is no one in the records. No name survives. And yet, she is everyone. She is legacy, hidden in ancient dust, and she is peace, nestled in clay. Tonight, as you lie beneath your own sky, may her story settle within you. May her river flow through your dreams like a song of old water. Let your breath match hers, gentle, even, deep. Your body rests on its own mat. Shadows fall softly. All that is needed now is calm. She lived without noise. She passed without fear. And if you listen carefully, you can still hear the quiet of her life beneath the hum of your own heartbeat. Close your eyes. Drift slowly. Sleep like she once slept, embraced by time, carried gently by the endless river. Chapter 2. A Quiet Life by the River. A Sleep Story from Ancient Times. A girl was given a new name, soft as reed in the wind. She wore clothes she'd never seen before, simple linen garments dyed faintly with mineral earth. Day by day she grew accustomed to the rhythm of the community, singing old songs in harmonious lines, practicing patience and silence, and taking part in daily activities that began and ended with the sun. At night, she slept in a quiet room, embraced by wind and the faint scent of river water drifting in through the carved openings in the walls. The world seemed to slow down, as if the nights themselves stretched gently over her small frame. This place was a communal house along the edge of a Mesopotamian settlement, not quite a school, not quite a temple, but something between. The walls were made of baked earth, thick, warm, protective. Long corridors led to shaded courtyards where water trickled from clay jars into shallow basins. There was a softness to everything. No one raised their voice. No one hurried. There was nothing to chase and nowhere to run. Mornings began when the first light touched the clay floors. The girl rose, her feet brushing through the cool dust, her breath still warm from sleeping. She combed her hair with a carved wooden tool and folded her sleeping mat neatly into its corner. By the time she emerged into the courtyard, the older girls had already begun their tasks, carrying water, sweeping the woven reed mats, feeding the small animals kept inside the enclosure. The air smelled faintly of grain, barley crushed into flour, wheat drying in the sun. Sometimes she was assigned to the weaving room, where old women sat in quiet circles, turning soft fibers into cloth. She would watch their hands move like gentle birds, folding and stretching in a practiced rhythm. Other days she sorted dried dates or tapped clay jars to test how full they were. Every task was slow. Nothing was wasted. Everything had its place. The sun flooded into the central court, yet never harshly. The thick walls gave gentle shade. A bird's call echoed through the passage like a small prayer. She felt no fear, no rush. Slowly, her breath began to match the pace of this place. Day after day, she learned. There was a small room where tablets of wet clay sat in rows. A soft-voiced woman taught her how to press a stylus made from reeds into the surface. The marks did not look like language to her, but the patterns had meaning. One symbol for jars, one for cattle, one for bundles of grain in storage. The girl watched with awe as the older woman pressed symbols that tracked life itself. It was quiet work, but it felt sacred, though no one used that word. Outside the walls, beyond her reach, stretched the great world. Fields of mud brick houses, paved courtyards, the distant murmur of trading voices. But inside there were only old songs and sunlight and the steady movement of time. The girl learned mental quietude, learned how to fold herself into the rhythm of things without resistance. Evening came slowly. The sky turned gold, then lilac. Girls gathered reeds along the riverbank, brushing them softly against their palms. They bathed their hands and feet in cool water, mixed with light perfume made from crushed date blossoms. They spoke in whispers and laughter, though never loud. The world again softened into breath. At night she lay upon her mat. Above her the ceiling was painted with faint patterns of wavy lines and simple stars. She traced them with her eyes before closing them. The wind brushed gently through the carved windows. Sometimes she heard a night bird, or the drip of water falling far away. Her sleep was not deep, but it was peaceful. The scent of reeds and clay surrounded her. Life was calm. Life floated by like the river outside, reflecting starlight and breathing silence onto the banks. She did not wonder what lay beyond. As months passed into years, the girl's hands became sure and her steps confident. She no longer watched others to know what to do. Instead, her body moved with memory, her heart synchronized with the unspoken pulse of the community. She woke exactly when the light began to warm the eastern wall. She measured the days not by numbers but by the weight of the tasks assigned to her. She learned to spin wool on a wooden spindle, the fibers slipping steadily through her fingers. She learned to grind dried herbs into powder. She became skilled at setting small clay figurines into rows, counting them, annotating them with brief marks in clay like soft breaths. Each day was uniform and still full. Once in late spring, she watched an eclipse with the other girls. They stepped onto the flat roof as the sky grew strangely quiet. Shadows dimmed the light. The edges of the sun turned a deeper gold. No one panicked. There was only silence, a shared wonder. The world had changed quietly for only a moment. When light returned, they cleaned their hands and resumed their work, leaving no marks of astonishment on the day. Her name faded from her memory eventually, replaced not by another sound but by her role. She was known as the water bearer for a time, then the grain measurer, then simply a steady one. She never asked to become more. She had found enough in being part of something ancient and ongoing, a river that flowed, a reed that stood, a song that lingered. The elders aged and disappeared as softly as they had lived. New girls filled the halls. The girl, now a woman, taught as she had been taught, quietly, gently. She guided without overbearing, demonstrated more than she explained. Where once she asked questions, she now answered without words, simply by showing the younger ones how to live in soft rhythms. The river stayed. Even in drought, it whispered. Even when clay jars cracked under heat, even when rain hammered the ground, the river waited, curled itself back into its course, and hummed near the sleeping quarters each night. Was there loneliness? Not like we know it. The woman was part of something complete, a small system of hands and careful gestures. She never bore children, nor dreamed of marriage. Her worth had nothing to do with the future. It lived in fragments of clay that she pressed, in reeds that she wove with loving precision. Once, a visitor from another settlement saw her working in the courtyard and asked, "Who is she?" The elder answered simply, "One of us." The visitor nodded, unable to understand, but respectful nonetheless. Her passing came gently. A day came when her hands trembled on the stylus, then another day when she chose not to rise for morning duties. The girls laid a cloth over her. She breathed slowly through the night and exhaled her last breath quietly, as softly as a river wave. She was not buried with grandeur, nor named in inscriptions, but her marks, the patterns she learned as a child, remain impressed in small tablets scattered across museums and collections. Thousands of years later, scholars look at those marks and wonder about the person behind them. They will never know her name, but we have her story. Tonight, as you sleep, imagine her again, wrapped not in cloth, but in the soft hum of ancient earth. Hear the rustling reeds, hear the river breathing. Let your own breath slow. You too are part of the river. The world is wide, the night is deep. Sleep now and drift like she once did on the quiet tide of time. Chapter 3. The Silent Mark. On Clay. A sleep story from an ancient house. Time flowed like the river outside, neither rushed nor hesitant, simply moving hour after hour, breath after breath. The girl's new name settled gently into the rhythm of her days. It was not her family name nor a name she would ever speak aloud, but it became woven into her being. She lived without needing to remember who she once was. She woke, she worked, she rested, always within the quiet pattern of life inside the earthen walls of the communal house. Over time, she realized she was no longer separate at all. She'd become part of something much larger, a structure made not of stone or clay, but of roles, rhythms, and calm repetition. She was no longer just a girl. She was an emblem of order, a vessel of discipline and stillness. By her 10th year in the house, she had already become known as the Quiet One, a person whose footsteps made no sound on packed earth. Each day she carried out her duties without worry or wonder. She rose when the wind shifted toward the east and the sky began to glow. She folded her reed mat with precision. She lit a small oil lamp when needed. She adjusted ceramic lids on jars of preserved seeds, pressing down gently to keep the cool air locked inside. Her movements, once uncertain, now flowed as effortlessly as the river's curve beyond the walls. She did not dwell on choices or identity. Time here did not ask questions. It made quiet offerings. There were tasks to do, hands to move, clay tablets to leave imprinted with symbols. As soon as she finished one task, her body moved gently into the next, without instruction, as if guided by a current only she and a few older women could feel. The outside world barely touched her. She heard the shouts of marketplace vendors in the distance, ringing like birdsong through the breeze. Sometimes she listened to footsteps of travelers, lodging briefly in the courtyard. But she never asked who they were or where they came from. Their presence rippled and receded like wind on water. The house was not a temple, though it had the hallowed stillness of sacred places. It was not a school, though lessons were woven through every hour. It was a place where order was daily life, where recorded clay tablets bore witness not to epic tales, but to reality. Numbers of grain sacks, lengths of cloth, seasons of harvest. She pressed signs into fresh clay without knowing how long they would last. Pressed, lifted, set aside. Some symbols were simple, counted bundles of flax, others measured time, a new moon, a completed harvest. She did not write stories. She wrote what mattered to survive. Her voice grew slow and seldom used. When she spoke, her words felt like sand sifting through fingers. Useful, brief, unburdened by self. Her eyes saw everything, the cracks in jars, the softening of reed baskets. But her face revealed nothing. She had become, as some in later ages would say, an instrument of time. But she did not know those words. She knew only the patterns handed down to her like lullabies pressed into clay. At times, she wondered if she had always been here. Did she once run barefoot across open earth? Did she once laugh too loudly under a shade tree? She thought she might have. but the thought faded gently, drifting beyond her reach, like smoke reaching sky. In this world, routine was warmth. Predictability was love. Her life did not ask her to dream. It asked her to be steady, a single gentle note held across a chorus of shifting seasons. Sometimes, during the quietest nights, she lay awake and listened to the breathing of others in the dark. All their breaths together sounded like wind moving through reeds along the riverbank. She wondered if the reeds moved even in still air, as if the world simply needed to sway, even when nothing else did. Then sleep would come, and she would dissolve back into the slow tide of time. Years drifted like soft ripples over still water. The girl, now a woman, had become so entwined with the rhythm of the house that even her shadow moved quietly. She had her own small corner, a spot close to the walls made warm by late sun, but she rarely thought of it as her own. Nothing belonged to her. Everything was shared, and that felt right, like clay pressed into a mold. She did not count the years in numbers, but in layers of tasks. She remembered seasons of carrying water, then seasons of weaving cloth, then seasons spent recording the numbers of sheep, barley, oil jars. Such things marked the passage of time better than age ever could. One day, a small girl with curious eyes asked her, "Do you ever get tired of doing the same thing every day?" The woman smiled with her eyes, though her lips barely moved. "The river does the same each day," she said gently, "and yet it gives life to everything." The girl pondered this, and the woman watched her, knowing she too would one day forget to ask such questions. Sometimes the tasks changed without warning. A roof tile cracked in the heat, and she helped replace it. The well needed clearing, and she walked deep into the earth with nothing but a clay torch to guide her. But even in change, the slow, even heartbeat of the house never stopped. There were no celebrations, and yet every morning felt like a quiet ceremony of welcome. The smell of warm stones, the click of wooden doors, the soft, steady footsteps of dozens of women moving through pale corridors. Every gesture felt like a bow, not to a deity seen or unseen, but to time itself. Her heart was serene. It did not surge. It did not break. It mirrored the clay she held with steady fingers, shaped by pressure, given purpose by heat, solid in silence. Once, when she was much older than she felt, she stood under the late moon and watched shadows of reeds dancing against the courtyard floor. She wondered how many nights she had watched those reeds. Hundreds? Thousands? Did it matter? The reeds did not try to remember each night's wind. They simply bent and rose like breath. She did not speak with many travelers, though occasionally they passed through. Whether carrying copper tools, clay figurines, or stories from lands beyond the rising hills, their footsteps were always loud. They marveled at the quiet of this place, at how the women moved without command, spoke softly, and seemed content without name or fame. They could not see what she felt, the giant tapestry they were all weaving together thread by thread. And so the years slid onward, gently like bare feet upon packed sand. One afternoon toward the end of her life, she sat with a small lump of clay. Her fingers pressed into it slowly, carefully, without intention. She was not recording stores of grain or cycles of moons. She was simply feeling the clay again, noticing its softness when wet, its weight in her palms. She thought of her first days here, how her hands had once trembled, holding the stylus. Now they trembled from age instead. She placed the lump of clay under sunlight, flattened, unmarked. For a long moment she watched the way light fell across it. She didn't need to press symbols anymore. She'd left enough marks already. Days later, the clay piece was left outside, and it crumbled back into dust, carried gently by the wind across the courtyard. Her breath, too, became softer, her steps slower. She moved less, observed more. Girls still passed her with reed baskets, murmured quiet greetings, and slipped into soft silence again. She sat by the river one evening, her knees drawn up, her chin resting against them. She listened to the water whisper as it went by. For the first time in years, she closed her eyes fully, not to sleep, but to listen. And in that listening, she heard her entire life in one breath: the scrape of clay, the hum of women's voices, the crunch of reed mats beneath bare feet, the long exhale of open sky. When she did not wake the next morning, there was no alarm. She had left as gently as she had lived. The air did not stir differently. The world did not tremble. One breath had simply ended, and the river kept flowing. The younger women folded her mat and brushed clay dust from her hair. They washed her hands. They placed her reed comb beside her feet. Her place in the room filled, quietly, by another girl. Later, when her memory turned to smoke, only the clay tablets remained, bearing her pressing, her shaping, her steady marks. Scholars from worlds she never knew would one day hold those tablets and wonder, who was she? They would not know her name, only that she once lived in quiet harmony with clay, hands, breath, and fire. But you know now. You have heard her story, carried through air like the hush of reeds under moonlight. Let it soothe you as you drift. Let your body soften like clay in still hands. Let your breath mirror the endless river. You belong to a gentle rhythm too, just by being alive. Sleep now and carry the silence forward. Chapter 4: Soft Steps on Clay, a sleep story of ancient stillness. She carried herself like a soft breath across cool clay floors, her feet always light, her presence never disruptive. Each day unfolded slowly, with tasks as gentle as morning light spilling across the edge of a river. She did not think of herself as important. She simply existed, like stone smoothing under time or reeds swaying at the riverbank. Every morning she stood by the entrance of the ancient house, welcoming guests who came to visit. Some came with beards like braided rope and robes dyed red from mineral dye. Others arrived with scrolls tucked beneath their arms and eyes that scanned every corner, searching for knowledge, order, or something unnamed. But all were greeted the same, with a bow of the head, a small gesture of open palms, a breath of quiet air. Even her gestures were slow. Her fingers did not flutter like startled birds. They moved like drifting sand. She poured water for guests from clay vessels worn smooth by hands before hers. She led them across courtyards, where birds slept in shade, and through long corridors, where sunlight danced quietly on mud brick walls. Sometimes she explained the schedule of the house, how each day brought specific routines: weaving in the mornings, gathering supplies from storerooms in the afternoon, readings by firelight at night. Her voice was soft and low, carrying just enough warmth to feel like a resting hand on one's shoulder. She did not choose these tasks. They were given to her by elders whose thin silver hair seemed to shimmer as they spoke. Some might have resisted, but she did not resist. She breathed in the rhythms given to her, like clay accepting the curve of a potter's fingers. There were days when things did not go as she expected. Perhaps a visitor asked too many questions. Perhaps an item went missing, a small copper spoon, a bundle of herbs, or perhaps the clouds held rain longer than the crops needed. Those were moments when she closed her eyes, stood still, and simply exhaled. The river had taught her that even changing currents eventually meet the sea, and so she learned to accept. Outside, breezes slid along sun-baked brick. Grains of sand lifted in spirals where the walls didn't block the wind. She'd watched those little whirlwinds since she was a child, when her family brought her here many years ago. Back then, she cried at night. From fear, from loneliness, from missing voices that smelled of wood smoke and home. Now she felt nothing but gentle quiet, not numbness, not indifference, a form of peace that settled deep inside her and became her breath. Not every task was easy. Some days she carried heavy jars upstairs or remained still in rituals for long moments until her legs trembled. Yet she did not ask for comfort. Her hands and feet had become part of the house's structure, moving, still moving again. Time was no longer her enemy. On a certain day in midsummer, she stood beneath a small arch where vines clung to the stone. A group of young apprentices arrived, scholars from a neighboring city-state sent here to learn the discipline of calm routine. They looked restless, bright-eyed, unused to stillness. She led them through the main hall. "The sun rises here," she said in a patient whisper, pointing toward faded engravings on the eastern wall. "Along this line, we mark the days. We carve the clay at noon. We bury the clay tablets at dusk." The apprentices nodded too eagerly. She smiled with her eyes only, then walked in silence. They followed her down a shallow step into the central courtyard. There, near the ancient well, someone was weaving. The brush of reeds against stone echoed softly. The apprentices stared. One asked, "Is that all they do here? Weave, write, do simple tasks?" She paused. The elder woman beside her spoke instead. "A task repeated is never simple. You will see that in time." Later that afternoon, she helped set up clay bowls filled with dates and water for the evening meal. Each bowl was placed with care, not in perfect lines, but in quiet balance. A stray blossom from the fig tree drifted into one dish, and she left it there. It looked intentional, like a whisper of color placed just for someone who might need to see it. That night, light came from oil lamps that burned slowly and gave shadows as warm as soft blankets. She sat by the fire with other women, humming a tune not meant for anyone but time itself. Sometimes there were words, sometimes only a vibration deep in the throat, like the humming of jars stacked tightly together. No one forced her to sing. She did it because something inside her vibrated when time settled over the courtyard just right, like when oil stopped flickering and settled into a perfect flame. In the guest hall, the apprentices spoke in circles. Some questioned the purpose of such lives. Others felt strangely calm. One carved into his wax tablet, The clay room is silent except for the breath of hands. She returned to her sleeping corner past midnight. Her room was plain. One mat, one blanket, a bowl of water, her comb of carved wood. She slept with her back facing the window so she could listen to wind brush past the reed nets. Sometimes she heard what sounded like distant laughter, perhaps a bird calling to another. She let go of thoughts the way a river lets go of pebbles, slowly, permanently. Years moved like water in thin streams, soft, clear, always changing shape. The girl became a woman and the woman became an elder. Her hair grew lighter, not from white, but from the dust of clay and flour. Her skin became flat and calm, like smooth stone. She felt her age not in pain, but in patience. Younger women now saw in her what she had once seen in others. The measured steps, the knowing pause before answering, the quiet that walked with her like a shadow. She no longer took part in all the duties. She sat more often by the threshold, smoothing linen strips or counting dried figs into baskets. Her hands still moved gently but slower. Her eyes, though soft and aged, saw everything. One night she felt tired not from work, but from the tender weight of time. She laid on her mat and opened her palm wide, feeling the woven texture beneath her skin. She closed her eyes and waited. It was not a waiting with urgency. It was like waiting for rain, knowing it would come in its own hour. She thought of all the people she had greeted, all the steps she had taken across the same courtyard, all the clay bowls she had carried from room to room. None of it was wasted, she knew. Even a single bowl placed gently was a part of the world's quiet work. Her breath grew light. In the morning they found her smiling, her body relaxed, hand resting gently on the clay comb she'd used since she was a girl. No one wept loudly. No one lifted her with heavy grief. They cleaned her mat, sang to her softly. The river hummed, low and distant, as if it too had known her and now let her go. And now you lie in a quiet room yourself, reading or perhaps listening. You are far from her world, yet something of her still moves in you. Close your eyes. You can feel the warmth of clay beneath your palms. You can sense the slow, even rhythm of her day, carried on the back of the wind. You do not always choose where you stand, and yet you can always choose how you breathe. So breathe. Let this sleep take you gently. Let yourself descend slowly into that ancient quiet where tasks are simple, where time is patient, and where even a single bowl of water reflects the sky. You belong here like she once did. Not because of what you do, but because you are part of the rhythm. Sleep. And let the world cover you, gentle as the river's endless flow. Chapter 5. Water from the river, light on the skin. The shape of a quiet morning. Daily life was simple. Personal cleanliness was sometimes inconvenient. Water came not from a tap, not from a bathhouse built of tiles and glass, but from the river that wound its slow body past the edge of the settlement. The river was patient and old, and everyone depended on it. Each dawn, before the sky had fully decided between night and day, she walked toward the water with others from the household. Their sandals brushed the dust, their steps unhurried. Clay jars rested against their hips, slightly cool from the fading touch of night. In the dim light, the river shone like a long sheet of metal, quiet and still, only the smallest ripples answering their approach. They filled the jars together, sharing the weight in silence. The water would later be poured into larger storage vessels inside, where it was portioned bit by bit, for washing, for cooking, for kneading dough, for brewing the light, grain-based drink that softened the edges of long days. No one took more than their share. The river might seem endless, but they knew it was not for them alone. Fields, animals, and countless unseen lives relied on the same flowing thread. Back inside the house, the air still carried a hint of coolness. The walls, made of sun-dried bricks and packed clay, held the memory of the night. She and the others used the shared basin to rinse their hands and faces. There was nothing luxurious about it. The water was not perfumed or steaming. Yet the simple act of splash and touch was enough to make the body feel awake. There were only a few combs in the household, carved from wood or bone. They passed from hand to hand, moving quietly in a small circle. She waited her turn, fingers already teasing apart the strands of her hair. When the comb finally reached her palms, it was warm from another's touch, carrying the faint scent of the herbal oil they all used. The oil was made from pressed seeds and leaves, infused with hardy plants that grew in the dry soil along the canals. Just a few drops in the hair kept it from tangling, kept it from drying under the strong sun. She worked it in gently, smoothing everything down, feeling the simple animal pleasure of being groomed, even in this modest way. Their clothing was plain. She wore the same kind of simple, woven garment as the others, cut straight, tied with a cord. The cloth was coarse, nothing like silk or fine linen from far lands, but it was clean enough, and when the wind blew, it pulled against the fabric and set it trembling lightly, like the leaves of the date palms beyond the walls. It was a life without extravagance, yet even within these limits, there was structure and rhythm. Mornings were for water and light, afternoons were for work and heat, evenings were for dust settling, for cooling stone, for the slow, steady unwinding of the day. Oil, grain, and the gentle order of things. The household shared many things: water, tools, vessels, spaces, even scents. It created a kind of quiet intimacy where lines between mine and yours blurred into ours. She did not keep her own mirror or her own set of jars. Instead, she moved through shared corners, shared shelves, shared routines that felt as stable as carved stone. Sometimes she helped prepare the oils. The elders trusted her with this task because her hands were careful and patient. Seeds had to be sorted first, separated from husks and small stones. She sat on a low stool in the courtyard, picking through the pile under a strip of dappled shade. Above her, the sky was a pale blue washed out by the daytime sun. Birds traced light arcs across it, disappearing behind the rooftops. Every so often she would pause and look up, watching the world move at its own unhurried pace. Then, with a soft breath, she would return to the seeds, fingers working, mind quiet. The seeds were ground and pressed, the oil caught in small clay bowls. Sometimes the bowls were inscribed with simple marks to remember whose batch was whose, or what plant had been used. An older woman might smell the oil and nod, approving the balance of sharp and soft, leaf and root. This same oil would later glisten in hair, on dry hands, or along bare arms that had spent the day lifting baskets and jars. It carried with it a faint trace of the fields and the plants, as if the land itself chose to stay near the skin. There was also the drink brewed from grain, mild, cloudy, often thick. It was not like the wines of distant hills, but a practical, nourishing liquid. After hours under the sun or in the crowded rooms, a small cup of it cooled the body and soothed the mind. She would sit near the doorway, sip slowly, and feel the day melt from her shoulders. Hygiene in such a place was never perfect. Dust settled everywhere. Sand found its way into sandals, onto mats, along the edges of the storage pits. The river water carried its own mysteries, silt, floating leaves, unseen life. Yet the people here did what they could with what they had. Hands were washed before meals, hair was oiled, bodies were wiped with damp cloths when the heat grew heavy. Clothes, simple as they were re-washed and spread to dry on lines stretched between wooden poles. What mattered most was not spotless purity, but the order of repeated gestures. Water drawn at the same hours, floors swept along the same paths, oil prepared in the same season each year. The predictability gave a kind of comfort, like a song hummed the same way every night. She moved within this order as easily as she moved her own limbs. When she stepped outside to fetch water, it was as if the house itself breathed in. When she returned, jars full and arms tired, the house breathed out again. It was a subtle harmony, almost invisible, but she felt it. Nightfall, stillness, and the long memory of clay. When the sun dipped low and the world turned amber, everything slowed even more. Work eased, voices softened. The heat loosened its grip on stone and skin. She and the others set aside the tools of the day, the combs, the bowls, the cloths. They rinsed what needed rinsing, wiped what could be wiped, and accepted what must simply wait for another sun to rise. There was no need to chase every speck of dust. The land was made of dust. They lived inside its rhythm, not against it. With the last of the daylight, they might pour a final basin of water. Women washed their feet, letting the day's dust drift away. They dabbed a little oil at the temples or wrists, not as perfume, but as a soft barrier against the dry air. The shared comb passed from hand to hand one last time, moving through hair now loosened for sleep. In scholarly books, centuries later, people would write about hygiene in such ancient places, about water from rivers, about shared basins, about oils made from seeds and herbs. They would note that cleanliness was practical, not luxurious, that people did what they could within the limits of their environment. They would mention clay pipes, in some cities communal baths in others, and simple basins like the ones she knew so well. But those careful pages would never quite capture the feeling of nightfall in her world. In her world, the sky slowly deepened from gold to violet, then to a dark, cool blue. A first star appeared overhead, then another, then a scattering of pale lights that seemed to tremble with quiet energy. The river, still visible beyond the walls, darkened and glimmered like a strip of polished stone. In the distance, an animal called once, twice, and then fell silent. She lay down on her mat, the woven fibers faintly rough against her skin. Around her, other bodies settled, the room filling with the soft weight of shared sleep. She heard the creak of wood as someone shifted, the gentle clink of a bowl being moved just a little farther from the edge of a ledge. Then stillness. Her thoughts did not rush. They drifted as casually as leaves on the water's surface. She thought of the river, of how its water had touched her skin that morning, had filled her drinking cup, had simmered in pots over the cooking fire. She thought of the oil on her hair, of the plants that offered their fragrance and nourishment. She thought of the simple cloth she wore, woven by hands she knew, from fibers grown in nearby fields. Daily life was not grand, yet beneath its simplicity, there was a deep and steady pattern as old as agriculture itself. Water, grain, oil, cloth, clay, each one shaped her days, her body, her sleep. And now as you listen, you can let your own breath fall into such a pattern. In, out, like the river flowing, like the house breathing, like a jar being filled and emptied again. You can picture her resting in that quiet room, a faint line of starlight slipping in through a gap in the wall. You might imagine the faint herbal scent on the air, the soft rustle of shared blankets, the faraway murmur of water. Let those images loosen the tightness in your shoulders. Let them smooth the busy edges of your day. You don't need marble baths or silver combs to feel clean inside. You need only rhythm, repetition, and the gentle knowledge that you belong to the same long story of water and skin, of earth and sleep. Close your eyes if you wish, and let history itself rock you. Somewhere, long ago, a girl by a river did the same. Chapter 6. What she gave, what the earth took. A sleep story. From long ago. The soft weight of contribution. Her youth was something she did not keep for herself. It was offered quietly, day after day, not to a person, not even to an idea she fully understood, but to a place, a rhythm, a shared life. She labored gently, giving grain to the storerooms, fruit from the garden, and sometimes even a young animal born under her care. All of it belonged to the community, to the broad structure that held them together like stones in a wall. She did not expect gratitude. The work did not require applause. She woke before dawn, stretched her limbs in the early coolness, and walked toward her tasks. Where others might have spoken loudly or questioned their role, she simply breathed and moved. Her hands knew what they were meant to do, and her mind drifted like a leaf on still water. In the heart of that place, some called it a sanctuary, others a home, workers lived with very little that was truly theirs. She had her blanket, her comb, the bowl she used at meal times, but nothing more. The tools she used belonged to everyone. The fruit she harvested went into the shared store. When an animal gave birth, she whispered thanks, then watched it be led away, knowing it would feed many. Some of those in charge grew wealthy. She noticed, but not sharply. They lived in rooms with better cloth and thicker mats. They wielded authority over schedules and supply lists. Their bracelets flashed in the sun, metal glinting as they pointed toward tasks. Yet even they spoke in measured tones, aware perhaps that their own position rested on the unseen labor of others. Sometimes, in late summer, she carried baskets of figs or dates to large clay jars. The fruit was warm from the sun, soft with sugar. The jars were sealed. marked with symbols that meant portions or preservation. It was during those quiet moments that she thought most clearly about what belonged to her. Her thoughts were not angry. They drifted like dust in sunlight, never settling in corners of bitterness. She never needed to worry about hunger. When the meal bell sounded, she sat with others at long, simple tables where stew and flatbread were passed hand to hand. There was always enough, never overly abundant, never lacking. She learned to eat slowly, savoring the warmth, gazing out through the archways where light fell in gentle squares. It mattered very little to her that she owned nothing. What mattered was that she was never alone. Every task brought her close to others, carrying grain together, washing the stone floors, singing softly as they sorted vegetables. Sometimes under the stars, she wondered what life might be like beyond these walls. She pictured walking toward a distant village, seeing new faces. But the thought passed quickly. She was rooted like a quiet plant, growing where she had been placed, open to the sky that changed, but always returned. The gentle currency of labor. In those days, currency was not measured by coins in a pocket or signatures on scrolls. It was measured in hours of sunlight, in sacks of grain moved from one courtyard to another, in quiet mornings spent repairing nets, weaving cloth, or tending goats. She contributed because this was what life required of her, and what she required from life was simple: calm, rhythm, warmth when night fell. She knew that her hands built value. She could see the storehouses grow fuller in harvest season. She could sense the hum of activity as offerings moved in and out, a constant exchange. Yet she never saw her own worth calculated in numbers or names. She did not own any of what she helped produce, but neither did she feel deprived. Just as rivers never keep the water that runs through them, she never clung to what she carried. The people who oversaw these exchanges, the ones who noted the deliveries, counted the animals, nodded approvingly when storage bins overflowed, walked differently. Their steps were measured, and their robes of thicker fabric caught the light in a way hers never did. They were not unkind. They simply lived in a layer above her own, a layer where decisions were made, a layer she drifted around but never touched. She saw how they used what she produced: grain for trade, fruit for feasts, animals for breeding or barter. Their world was woven from the efforts of many. And though she played a part in that weaving, she did not grasp the pattern. She didn't need to. Knowing that her work supported something larger felt enough. Her greatest wealth was time itself. She had time to watch clouds move across the sky, time to break bread slowly with quiet laughter and shared stories. There were days when she stopped beneath a fig tree and simply waited for her breath to settle, feeling the bark beneath her fingers and the softness of shade on her skin. Evenings by the river brought small rituals. Someone would lead the way with a clay jar. Others followed. They washed their hands, rinsed their faces. The water was cool and carried tiny flecks of light where the last sunbeams caught it. In these moments, she felt clean, not just in body, but in spirit. Later, drifting to sleep on her woven mat, her thoughts moved like water. She didn't cling to them. They flowed past. Some held questions, some held memories. Others were nothing at all, just the quiet hush of a mind at peace. Sleep in the shade of shared walls. Years passed like slow-moving shadows. She grew older, her hands carried more lines, her voice drifted lower at times, especially when morning air was thick with dust, yet the work remained gentle. She never felt crushed under its weight. Even in old age, she rose early. She often walked to the fruit garden, moving water from one clay vessel to another, making sure each plant drank its fill. She touched the ripening dates and smiled at the sweetness hidden inside. Other workers would call to her, "Do you need help?" "No," she would answer softly. "The trees grow better when I'm quiet." There was a respect between her and the earth, one that required no words. Sometimes the young workers didn't notice it at first, a subtle conversation between roots and hands. But over time they learned. They watched how she placed her palm near a plant's stem, feeling for coolness or thirst. They watched how she stood in silence beside the outdoor ovens, knowing exactly when a loaf was done simply by its scent. She had given much, and though she received no titles, no land, her life was full, her sleep was sound, her meals warm, her memories threaded gently through the fabric of the place. When harvest weeks came, she worked alongside others, singing while lifting baskets, humming while placing fig after fig into the clay-lined pits for drying. The song was never loud. It drifted into the air like a gentle breeze, barely disturbing the dust around her sandals. In the evenings, after tasks were done, people sat together in circles. They passed around small cups of diluted berry drink. They told quiet stories, some from their youth, some from ancestors long gone. She listened, resting her hands in her lap, soaking in the words. Sometimes when she spoke, it was with a slight smile. "I remember," she'd say, "a day when a goat wandered into the kitchen courtyard. We followed it for hours. It was like chasing a wandering laugh. Others would laugh quietly. They hadn't known her then, but they felt the warmth of that memory, its weight gentle and soft. And so, this was the shape of her life. Not sharp, not dramatic, a steady pulse beneath the earth, a breath given each day to a place that knew her as soil knows the seed. When she felt tired at night, she would lie down on her mat, made of reeds, slightly dented from years of sleep. The room was dark, but not cold. Air from the courtyard carried the scent of baked earth and fading fruit. The walls held her softly. You too, hearing this now, may feel a similar weightlessness, a settling, a reminder that not all stories need turning points. Some simply drift, like her life did, quiet, connected, fulfilled by the act of giving. Close your eyes. Imagine her hands resting at last. Imagine the soft hush of the garden at dusk. Imagine yourself in that shared space, barely needing anything, gently accepted by time. Sleep comes easily when nothing is owned, yet everything is enough. Sleep now, as she did. Chapter 7. Quiet Shapes in the Sand. A story of stillness and belonging. The path already chosen, there was no family waiting for her beyond these walls, no relatives who arrived with woven baskets, no siblings whispering secrets under blankets late at night. Her life had been set on its tracks long ago, not by sudden decision, but by quiet agreements, murmurs in shaded rooms, nods exchanged between elders. She was told when she was young, "This will be your place." She did not resist, not because there was no desire in her, but because she was woven into a world where individual paths blended gently into the structure of the whole. Here within this enclosed space of sunlit courtyards and shadowed archways, life was not built around the idea of personal possession. There were no locked rooms, no secret drawers. Privacy existed only in one's thoughts, held softly behind closed eyes. Everything else, tools, food, stories, hopes, belonged to the collective hum of the place. She watched others sometimes, those from outside, those with rings on their fingers and promises made under starlight. Families walked through courtyards in the city, children reaching for their parents' hands, voices rising and wrestling with laughter and want. But those sounds were far from here. Her days instead were shaped by quieter rhythms. She woke early, stretched her limbs in the steady pale light that washed over the walls, and listened to the sounds of others assembling in the courtyard. Gentle footfalls, soft bowls set onto stone surfaces. Breakfast was eaten without hurry, in a long hall where women sat facing each other, heads bowed, each allowing the morning to settle within them like silt in a calm river. She never felt resentment. Instead, her independence grew like a smooth stone, unadorned, uncomplicated, solid. The quiet encouraged this, drawing her inward, helping her notice the delicate breath behind her own thoughts. No one asked her to belong to another person. No one expected her to bear children or inherit land. Those lines in the tapestry simply did not run through her. So she learned to lean into the sound of group footsteps, the rustle of fabrics in the wind, the gentle collective breath that seemed to pulse from the walls. Her inner world became spacious, not empty but uncluttered, like a garden of low-growing herbs, tended lightly. She could hear her own thoughts as clearly as birdsong echoing across the stone. A quiet room within herself. In time, that quiet became not just a condition of her surroundings, but a room she carried inside. She could sit beneath an olive tree at midday and hear her own thoughts unspool like thread. Some people would have felt lonely in such stillness, but she learned to take comfort in it, the same way one takes comfort in knowing that the moon will rise, even if unseen. Her place in this community required presence, not performance. She needed no husband to anchor her, nor children to justify her efforts. Her role was to maintain the steady pulse of the day, preparing food, managing stores, tending to simple tasks that let life run smoothly. What she offered was not counted in coins, but in time and calm consistency. She sometimes envied the younger ones, who still carried sparks of restlessness. They would gaze beyond the walls with hungry eyes, speaking of markets and festivals just out of reach. She smiled at them with gentle patience, knowing that their fire might someday soften too, like embers becoming red glow beneath ash. Her surroundings were modest: a wooden comb, a clay cup, one woolen blanket. These were her comforts. The simplicity did not feel like deprivation. It felt like lightness. Without possessions to remember or protect, she found her inner world expansive, uncluttered by the weight of ownership. In this way, she was free. Freer, perhaps, than those who carried scrolls of duties and unwritten expectations. And the walls around her, though made of clay and mortar, never made her feel trapped. They were shelter, consistency, the shape of something predictable in a world of shifting sands. If the wind carried the scent of a distant fire, or if occasional laughter wafted through the gates at dusk, she would pause, not longing but observing. The world was large, she knew, and she belonged to one quiet corner of it. She found great peace in this smallness. There was never too much asked of her, nor too much withheld. She arranged baskets, counted fruit, watched the seasons turn, and felt the steady thread of breath in her chest. Her heart beat not in worry, but in acceptance, as if she had slowly become a part of the daily repetition, like the slow wear of stone beneath sandals. The sanctuary in stillness. Even the elders remarked quietly that she seemed to merge with the silence, that she walked more lightly than most, that her eyes saw deeper into the gentle movements of daily life. It wasn't something she worked toward. It simply grew within her, like a tree extending its roots to find its balance. Most of her labor was unremarkable. She maintained inventory in the storeroom, baskets of barley, bundles of dried herbs, and clay jars filled with oil. She kept track of how many blankets were mended, how many sandals needed repair. Her hands moved, but her thoughts drifted softly like petals carried on a quiet stream. Sometimes in pauses between tasks, she would find herself in a room filled with shallow pots of well water. There she would kneel, rinse her hands and face, and watch soft ripples spread outward. The water held moonlight on some evenings, candles on others, and always her reflection shimmered there briefly. Not a face greedy for more than she had, but a gentle presence woven into peace. Even in historical texts, written centuries later, these types of communities were seen with puzzlement. Places where individuals dissolved into a shared rhythm, rarely leaving behind stories of personal grandeur or heroic unrest. No myths were built around her. No songs were sung of her deeds. Yet her existence was part of a reality where life did not require larger-than-life moments. She was taught early on that her existence was part of a greater pattern, one that stretched backward into ancestors she would never know and forward into generations that would never know her name. That idea did not frighten her. Instead, it soothed her, like knowing that the river always returns to itself, even after seasons of drought. At night, she would lie on her mat, listening to the low hum of cicadas beyond the courtyard walls. She did not wish for more. She did not linger on thoughts of what could have been. Her thoughts emptied like a vessel returned to the storeroom, ready again, clean and useful, waiting only for morning to arrive. In this state, she slept deeply, becoming another breath in the vast body of time. A soft legacy. As years folded quietly upon themselves, she changed like the grain fields beyond the walls. Her hair lightened, her back curved slightly with age, but her movements remained soft. Even as her body slowed, her mind did not harden. It opened wider, as if the silence within her had grown to become a sanctuary. She had no children to inherit her memory, no partner to hold her hand in old age, but there were many who approached her, gently seeking counsel. Young women, feeling the tension of their first long days alone within the community. Older ones, wondering if they had made peace with their own hearts. She spoke sparingly and always in observations, never in commands. She might say, "The river deepens every year, though you don't see it." Or, "The olive tree gives fruit only after years of roots you never see." Her voice held no urgency. Her words were never meant to direct, only to soothe. When she was no longer capable of managing storerooms and tasks requiring strength, she began sorting seeds, tiny things, reminders of growth in small forms. She held them between her fingers, studied their shapes, and let her breath settle. Her touch was precise, lingering just enough to feel the story within each seed, that someday it might root, sprout, bloom, feed, the same way her actions once fed others. On her final evening, she sat watching the horizon turn gold, then rose to a soft indigo. The courtyard was quiet. Others moved slowly to their sleeping places. The breeze carried a hint of flowering mint. She closed her eyes. If she had regrets, they washed away in that moment. Grains of sand returning to the sea of silence she had tended all her life. When morning came and she did not rise, those who had known her gathered in quiet respect. They did not build a grand marker or recite epic verses. Instead, they lit oil lamps in the shade of the courtyard, and for a moment, all of them stood together in silence, breathing the stillness she once carried so easily. Her memory did not vanish. It dissolved gently into the rhythm of daily life, in the order she once kept, in the calm she once cultivated, in every jar placed gently on the shelf, in every step taken quietly through the morning corridor. A soft legacy, one that remains not through loud praise or carved stone, but through quiet hearts, stillness shared, and the gentle knowing that some lives are not measured in possession or volume, but in unwavering peace. Chapter 8, Threads of Quiet, a sleeping story of her final years. A shift toward stillness. There came a time long after her hands had worked through storms and seasons, long after the sound of her steps had become familiar to every threshold, when she was no longer called outside to lift or carry. The years had softened her joints, and the sun, once warm against her skin, now made her move more slowly. And so, naturally, she was guided into quieter tasks. They gave her a small room near the archive, a kind of inner chamber where light passed gently across stored clay tablets, woven baskets of scrolls, and shelves of folded cloth. The walls were thick, cool to the touch in summer. The air inside held the faintest fragrance of pressed leaves, dried ink, and old earth. Her responsibilities now were lighter. She no longer walked to the communal fields with the others at dawn. Instead, she sat near woven mats where the oldest garments were repaired. Some she mended by touch alone, her fingers tracing worn seams, guiding thread through linen with the precision of memory. Her eyes had grown dimmer, but something inside her could still sense where a tear would widen. She knew how to make it disappear, stitch by invisible stitch. Sometimes she copied texts onto new parchment, not because the ink was urgent, but because time asked for it. The tablets needed preserving, the scrolls needed renewing. Dawn and dusk came and went without demand. There was no one rushing her, only stillness and rhythm, and her fiber-bound brush dipping into ink like a bird resting by water. Her companions were no longer the strong-voiced women who led the harvest rituals or counted grain in the courtyard. Instead, she spent her time with those who moved softly, old hands like her or apprentices learning the shapes of early script. They spoke in low, humming conversations about the weather, about who would soon replace the cracked roof tiles, about what plants had bloomed in quiet corners of the stone garden. She did not miss the bustle. She listened instead to the subtle sound of reed pens brushing against surface, the gentle shuffle of sandals on smooth floors. Occasionally, a young girl would pass through, arms full of fabric deliveries, and bow quietly before continuing on. Outside, the world continued with its own hum. People still worked the orchards. They still sang during meal prep and laughed in the dusk air, but she no longer felt the need to be part of those large voices. At night, she lay on her mat and let the sounds of insects and distant footsteps fill the room. No long farewells were given to her when her role changed. No ceremony marked her shift. It unfolded simply like a curtain pulled slowly across a window, letting in dimmer light. That was enough. She had always known that one day her hands would lift less, that the community would keep moving, but her place in it would turn toward quiet. Even without fanfare, she remained anchored, still woven into the shared breath of the place. She would live out her days where she'd lived her youth and her middle years. There was no desire in her to leave, no need to be seen, only the soft, constant work of gentle time. The loom of memory. The loom stood in a cool corner of the chamber, its wooden frame polished by years of touch. It was simple, not special to the eye, but beautiful, in the way a well-used stone is beautiful, smooth in the right places, warm to the hand. She had woven on looms like this since she first arrived as a girl. But now, her weaving was different. Each movement of her hands was slow, measured, like breath drawn deeply before releasing. She no longer wove cloth large enough for robes or ceremonial banners. Instead, she made narrower pieces, lengths of cloth used to wrap scrolls, cushion storage jars, or line shelves where sacred objects rested. The threads she worked with were fine but strong, dyed in muddy reds, faded purples, and soft ochres. They carried the scent of the dye room, earth, and crushed petals. When she touched them, she sometimes remembered the women who taught her to weave years ago. Some had long since passed. Others had left the community entirely. Their laughter sometimes still hovered in her memory, like sunlight on a river's surface. In the quiet of her work, she noticed little things: the slight whistle of wind at certain hours, water dripping gently onto stone after washing bowls were emptied. Every sound was softer now, every action slower, but her sense of belonging had never been deeper. At midday, she took her meal alone or with one other: bread, a thick soup of lentils and grain, a small portion of fruit in season. She ate slowly, noticing how her fingers shook just a bit as she tore the bread. She did not mourn this. It was part of life's quiet turning, a demonstration that her body too had seasons. In the afternoon, she would move to the archive, a place of layered stillness, where narrow windows allowed beams of sunlight to reveal dust motes dancing like tiny drifting stars. Dozens of clay tablets rested on shelves, alongside worn scrolls and baskets of writing tools. Some of the tablets were marked with symbols only the oldest could read. Those were set aside gently when she dusted. The elders said they told stories of early rivers and forgotten treaties. Stories that had no urgency now, but whose rhythms still held weight. She spent time copying short inscriptions onto newer surfaces. Her handwriting was slower, less precise than it once was, but she didn't rush. Ink pooled softly into thick lines. Each brush stroke seemed to stretch its own timeline, unhurried, almost meditative, as if writing itself was an act of prayer. And even here, among ink and wood and dust, she felt the pulse of community. Apprentice scribes brought her water. A young woman once left a sprig of lavender by her workstation, a silent acknowledgement of respect. She placed it in her sleeve like a folded memory. Sometimes when her mind drifted, she imagined the threads on her loom weaving themselves into her days, work and rest, breath and silence, old memories winding together with the present. She missed nothing, not what was gone, nor what might have been. The quiet had become her home, and she was, at last, fully inside it, like light settling into still water. A gentle withdrawal. Seasons faded into one another like soft threads being woven into a cloth too large to see completely. She no longer marked time by festivals or new moon offerings, only by the shifting length of shadows across the courtyard tiles. Morning shadows stretched long in cold months. By summer they trembled shorter, holding heat, and she observed them with the calm of someone who had nothing left to hurry toward. Fewer and fewer tasks called her name. Some mornings she would wake and simply sit, listening to the layered murmurs of those beginning their day in the next courtyard, the shuffle of feet, the muted clinking of bowls. Her breath matched their rhythm, yet she remained still. Her body had changed, gently but undeniably. Fingers once steady now trembled with slight waves. Knees once strong now asked her to sit after standing only briefly. There were days when someone else lifted the water jar for her, pouring into her cup with reverence. She offered a nod of thanks, but sometimes she simply smiled silently, knowing gratitude did not always need words. Others began to take over the tasks she once held, counting the jars of oil, ordering the linen strips, arranging tablets by era or author. She did not mind. It felt natural, like leaves falling quietly from a tree that still stands sturdy. She stepped back, step by step, not into emptiness, but into space where time stretched wider and gentler. She now spent long hours near the garden wall, where a vine of fragrant herbs grew in stacked pots. She would lean her back against the sun-warmed stone and close her eyes. The scent of sage or fenugreek, growing there, depending on the season, drifted over her, mingling with a faint earthiness and a hint of water from the fountain nearby. Birds perched above, pecking at seeds. She heard their little feet land softly, their gentle calls rising and falling like short songs between breaths. Sometimes apprentices approached her for wisdom. They would sit beside her, their voices eager, their bodies still learning patience. They asked simple questions. Did you ever want to leave this place? Did you ever think you would marry? Were you always content? She replied as softly as the breeze brushing the leaves above them. There were years when I wondered what lay beyond these walls, she would say. But wonder doesn't mean longing, and longing does not always mean moving. We are not always meant to cross every threshold, she continued. Some lives are meant to fully bloom where they were first planted. Her words did not sound like teachings. They were offerings. Small, fragile truths left gently in the open hands of the young. Some understood immediately. Others grew into their meaning over time. She felt no urgency to be understood. Her life was no grand tale. It was soft, humble, shaped not by heroic acts, but consistent ones. It left no visible marks, yet made a quiet music in the rhythm of shared work and silent devotion. At night, she sometimes dreamt of things that never happened, fields she had never walked through, rivers she had never crossed. Yet even in these dreams, she felt the warmth of familiar light, the breath of peace resting on her skin. Last, threads to tend. The storeroom where she once counted sacks of lentils now felt like a riverbank she only occasionally visited. Others walked in and out, their voices whispering of quantities and demands, their hands busy lifting and weighing. She merely watched from a distance now, leaning against the stone pillar outside the doorway, listening with something close to nostalgia, but softer. Not grief, not hunger, only the calm of watching what once was hers take root in new hands. She no longer recorded the inventories of winter grain or assigned tasks for drying herbs. Instead, she kept a small basket by her side. In it, she placed narrow strips of cloth she had woven over weeks. Some for wrapping old tablets, others to line small storage vessels. The strips were made slowly, conversations with time rather than products of urgency. Sometimes she paused mid-weave and simply looked up, at sunlight laid across clay bricks, at a gently chipped water jug, at a speck of dust floating in the warm air. The world was still, and she felt entirely inside it, part of its breath, and letting it pass through her without resistance. In this quiet phase, her work became a kind of meditation. She held threads between her fingers, adjusted them, watched them fall into place, like noticing thoughts appear and then gently fade from consciousness without struggle. She no longer worried about whether her weaving was perfect. It wasn't that perfection didn't matter. It was that perfection lived in the attempt, not the result. She taught one girl to weave, who seemed especially clumsy at first. The girl often apologized, cheeks red with frustration. "It's all right," she would whisper. "The cloth remembers the hands that made it. It doesn't ask for speed." The girl cried once, silently, over crooked threads. She placed her own hand gently over the girl's trembling fingers and said nothing. That was enough. On cooler afternoons, when her joints ached less, she walked the perimeter of the inner courtyard. Every few steps she paused to greet the plants that grew along the edges. Herbs, flax, wildflowers that found their way over the years. Some of the women tended them with care. Others left them to grow as they pleased. She loved them either way. Her life now was shaped not by action, but by attention, by stillness, by the ability to witness even the subtleties of wind shifting against the reed walls. She felt rooted not just in place, but in time, a time that no longer demanded productivity or visibility. She had reached a stage she once thought would feel empty, a time when work hardly needed her, when activity moved around her like water around a stone. But the opposite was true. She felt incredibly full of every sunrise she had seen from the same window frame, full of every day spent learning the posture of calm. Verbs became slower in her mind, to sit, to watch, to breathe. She embodied them all gently until the room itself seemed to breathe with her. Her final weaving? It was in late autumn when she slowed further still. The air in the mornings began to cool, carrying the scent of clay after rain. mingled with smoke drifting from the kitchen hearth. Women layered on thicker cloth, covered their shoulders with woven shawls that seemed to glow gently in the morning light. She, too, wrapped herself, not in large robes, but in a small, soft cloth she'd woven as a gift to herself many years ago. It was worn now, frayed slightly at the edges, yet she loved it more for that. Her movements became like breath itself, rising gently, falling gently. She no longer sat at the loom every day. Her work seemed complete. Instead, she sometimes stood by the doorway to watch others weave, fingers brushing the threads she once knew intimately. She no longer needed to shape the cloth. Her role had become the quiet presence that affirmed its continuation. When she woke one late afternoon with a feeling of deep stillness inside her, she knew it was time to prepare. She quietly gathered the few items she still called her own: one folded cloth, a small wooden comb, a single tablet with no marking, just the smooth surface of possibility. She placed them in a basket beside her mat. That night, she asked no one for help. She lay down gently, letting her head rest against the woven pillow she had made long ago. The light from the oil lamp traced soft patterns on the wall. She watched as it flickered. A slow inhale, a calm release. She knew she would not get up again. Morning came softly, sliding across the ground in gentle shadows. One of the younger women came to her room, a bowl of warm grain in hand. She knocked once and entered quietly. She saw her, still, serene, eyes closed, as though resting after a long weaving session. No alarm swept through the community. No cries interrupted the morning breath. They knew, as she had known, that the doorway she had reached was simply the next quiet step. The women washed her with clean water, smoothed her hair, and clothed her in one of the simple, undyed garments she had worn every day. She was not buried far away. She remained within the community walls, resting beneath an old fig tree, wrapped in the cloth she had woven for herself, looking almost as though she might wake at the faintest sound of spinning wheels. In the days that followed, her absence was felt not as an emptiness, but as a soft resonance, like the hum of a loom in another room. Her name was not spoken often, but her gestures lived on, in the small rituals of folding cloth, in the quiet moments before dawn when dust caught the early light, in the way some women paused before speaking, as though to honor silence itself. She left no heirs, no letters, yet her legacy was rich, threaded through every corner of the place she had lived. Her life was not recorded in chronicles, but those who slowed enough, who watched as she once had, could sense it, in the way the ink bowl was placed just so, in the fresh cloth that lined the oldest tablets, in the gentle way new apprentices were taught not to rush. They didn't hold a ceremony for her passing. In that, there was a grace. Her life had been the ceremony. Everything she had touched carried a rhythm, steady as breath, soft as dusk settling into quiet water. The loom stood silent but never still. Someone else would weave, and the threads of quiet would continue. Let the quiet of evening drift over you like a woven shawl of starlight, soft and wide. Let the quiet of evening settle over you like an oversized, slightly itchy shawl of starlight, hand-woven, well-intentioned, and impossible to return. Let the distant wind whisper vague, unhelpful advice, the kind that sounds profound until you realize it's saying absolutely nothing. Tonight, the world graciously agrees to slow its heartbeat just for you, not dramatically. Just enough that you can notice your own and think, "Oh, there you are." Close your eyes. Or half close them in that way that suggests rest, but secretly keeps an eye on your thoughts in case they try anything funny. Let the threads of the day loosen gently in your mind. Emails unravel, conversations dissolve. That one awkward moment from 3 years ago finally sinks like a leaf into deep, calm water, still visible for a second, then gone, hopefully forever. There is nothing left to carry, nothing left to chase, and if there is, it has agreed to wait until morning, allegedly. You are safe here in the hush of night, safe from notifications, safe from expectations, safe from the idea that you should be doing something productive right now. You have officially entered the time slot where existing quietly counts as an achievement. Listen. No, really, listen. If you are very still, you might hear it. Not a voice, not a choir, not even a motivational podcast sneaking into your subconscious. It's the sound of your own breath, performing its ancient, unpaid job with remarkable consistency. In, out, in, out. A lullaby with no lyrics, no agenda, and no surprise key change. Just rhythm. Reliable. Unimpressed by your worries. This gentle humming reminds you of something easy to forget during daylight hours. Rest is not a reward you earn by being exhausted enough. It's not a luxury item nor a guilty pleasure. It's a basic human feature like blinking or sighing dramatically. You are allowed to rest simply because you exist. Wild concept, really. Let your dreams stretch wide tonight, like open fields under soft dawn light, or like a screensaver that finally kicks in after a long day of mental overuse. May sleep carry you the way a river carries petals, slowly, steadily, without asking where you're headed or why you didn't plan better. No rushing, no optimizing, no 5-step process to maximize relaxation. Let go. Yes, all of it. The tension in your shoulders, the need to figure things out right now, the internal voice that insists you should be doing more, being more, fixing more. Kindly tell that voice it can clock out. It's late. Tomorrow will wake in its own time. It always does, annoyingly punctual. But tonight belongs to tranquility, to the soft stars watching silently from their high places, offering zero feedback, to quiet hearts, to tender thoughts that don't need to become plans. This is not the time for ambition. This is the time for softness. Sleep, dear one, knowing the earth holds you gently, like hands cupping water, careful not to spill, not squeezing too hard, trusting gravity to do its thing. You are supported more than you realize, even when it doesn't feel particularly poetic. And if you wake before the sun arrives, because of a dream or a noise, or your brain deciding 3:17 a.m. is the perfect moment to review your entire life, don't rush to call the world back. Don't reach for meaning. Don't check the time like it owes you money. Stay where you are. Float in that strange, quiet space between night and light, where nothing is required of you except breathing gently and existing mildly. Let silence be enough. Let stillness do the work. good night. And until we meet again, may every closing of your eyes feel less like an ending and more like a horizon opening, wide, calm, and mercifully free of to-do lists.